Mr. Swalwell, did she occur to you to be somebody who had deep knowledge of the president's decades-long business and professional and political contacts? Mr. Dearborn, I can only assume. Mr. Swalwell, how many phones did you use during the campaign? Mr. Dearborn, I had a personal cell phone. Mr. Swalwell, would you ever make would you ever conduct campaign correspondence with the personal cell phone? Mr. Dearborn, I don't know if I did or not. We had phones there at the office, and normally I would just pick the phone up there and make the calls. Is it possible that Mr. Swalwell, sure. Mr. Dearborn, called someone? I'm sure, but... Mr. Swalwell, did you have a campaign cell phone? Mr. Dearborn, no. Mr. Swalwell, so if you had to call, say you mentioned Mr. Mashburn and you were in the car or, away from the office, you would use your personal cell. Mr. Dearborn, yeah, probably my personal cell. But he was also right next door. I could shout to him too. Mr. Swalwell, and you also, I assume, would text if necessary. Mr. Dearborn, yeah, if need be. We tried to talk on the phone or, we were all there in a small office so we could all get together and meet. It was kind of easy. Mr. Swalwell, how about emails? Did you have a campaign email address? Mr. Dearborn, I did, yeah. Mr. Swalwell, and how about a personal email address? Mr. Dearborn, and I have a personal email address too. Mr. Swalwell, would you ever correspond with anyone about the campaign with your personal email address? Mr. Dearborn, I tried to limit that. I think before we got the campaign email address up, I had a personal email, and so I used that. But then we tried to do everything on a campaign email, and I tried to be pretty consistent about that. Mr. Swalwell, have you had an opportunity to review the personal email address to see if there were any documents relative to our request? Mr. Dearborn, I believe that was the request that you made, and I reviewed and then provided. Mr. Swalwell, okay. Mr. Dearborn, right. Mr. Swalwell, how about Senator Sessions? How many mobile devices was he using during the campaign? Mr. Dearborn, during the presidential campaign? Mr. Swalwell, yes. Mr. Dearborn, he had an official phone and he had a campaign phone. That's what most folks had. Mr. Swalwell, and if you needed to get a hold of him about the campaign, how would you contact him? Mr. Dearborn, I'd call the campaign phone. Mr. Swalwell, how about would he ever text message on the campaign phone? Mr. Dearborn, he didn't text a lot, and when he did, it was hard to read them. Mr. Swalwell, how about email addresses? How many email addresses was Senator Sessions using during the presidential campaign? Mr. Dearborn, well, he and I had a Jeff Sessions campaign account that we would talk on about campaign stuff. I may have sent him emails from the Donald Trump campaign account to that campaign account because he didn't have a Donald Trump account. That's the only one he had. So there would be probably a handful of emails that we shot back and forth. Several. I mean, whatever the issue was, if I needed to contact by email, I'd do it. Mr. Swalwell, sure. Mr. Dearborn, normally I'd try to talk to him if I could in person, but, you know. Mr. Swalwell, did he have a personal email account, non-campaign, non-work? Mr. Dearborn, he may have for his family, but it wouldn't be something that we would normally email to. Mr. Swalwell, when did you first meet Paul Manafort? Mr. Dearborn, I met him by phone, I think, in March. Mr. Swalwell, of 2016. Mr. Dearborn, I think that is correct. Mr. Swalwell, and did you eventually meet him in person? Mr. Dearborn, I did. Mr. Swalwell, where was that? Dearborn, I think I went up to New York to meet with him, right to Trump Tower. Swalwell, did you understand how he came to join the campaign? Dearborn, just by what I read. Swalwell, did you interact at all with Mr. Manafort at the Republican convention? Dearborn, I did. Swalwell, okay, and what did that look like? Dearborn, so we had kind of the D.C. office, the congressional team, and the policy team. So our policy team, tried to help out the RNC's team on the platform. And then I also helped out at the Rules Committee. But my interaction with Mr. Manafort, the campaign, at the convention was very limited. He was kind of running the convention, and I was on a different level, kind of running around trying to help out. Swalwell, at any time during your work with Mr. Manafort, were you aware of his prior business contacts in Ukraine? Dearborn, not until it popped out in the paper. Didn't know about any of that until it actually popped in the paper. Swalwell, did he ever express any opinions about foreign policy positions with Russia or foreign policy positions with Russia and Ukraine? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, how about once you started? Well, when did you start going to Trump Tower more regularly? Dearborn, once the transition kind of kicked up, I went up. There were a couple of campaign meetings where the request was they wanted to have everybody from the campaign come up to New York. In 2016, I would have gone up there less than a handful of times, and it was just a campaign meeting. My piece was small. Hey, we have new members that have endorsed us, that kind of thing. Swalwell, it looks like the foreign policy team started to come together in March 2016. Does that sound about right? Dearborn, well, that's when a small policy team was put together. Swalwell, were you a part of that? Dearborn, I was and I wasn't. I supervised the office. John was policy director. I did interact on a weekly and sometimes daily basis with J.D. and Waleed. Mr. Swalwell, when did you first meet Waleed? Mr. Dearborn, I met Waleed, I guess, sometime in that March time period. He wasn't initially on board, but then came in a couple weeks later. And then he also left at some time, maybe late spring. Because I think it was impacting his commentary role on TV or something like that. Mr. Swalwell, how about J.D.? When did you first meet J.D.? Mr. Dearborn, I met J.D. a long time ago, and he did work, I think, on the Huckabee campaign and was very interested in working on the Trump campaign. Mr. Swalwell, was Sam Clovis a part of that team? Dearborn, Sam Clovis was the policy director for the campaign prior to this team being kind of stood up. And we would talk to Sam. I mean, Sam was kind of the encyclopedia of what the then candidate would talk about on multiple issues. So different members of the team would talk to Sam. Swalwell, did you have any role in picking the team members? Dearborn, which team members? Swalwell, so Senator Sessions led the foreign policy team, is that right? Dearborn, Senator Sessions was asked to put together a national security working group. Swalwell, when was that? Dearborn, just to be clear, that's different than the foreign policy team. Swalwell, so the foreign policy team is the Dearborn, in-house. Swalwell, and the working group that you referenced, when did that get set up? Dearborn, you'll have the dates, but sometime in the late spring, maybe. Swalwell, were you a part of picking the members for that team? Dearborn, I did help the senator, but mostly he would list off people he thought had really good foreign policy experience, and then ask to make, I'm going to make some calls to see if these guys would like to join. And then there was another group of people that Sam had tapped that was kind of a starter kit group, and then we added more beyond that. Swalwell, so Sam's team, did that include George Papadopoulos? Dearborn, it did. Swalwell, did it include Joe Schmitz? Dearborn, it did. Swalwell, did it include Carter Page? Dearborn, it did. Swalwell, and did it include Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg? Dearborn, yeah, there were 4, so Kellogg may have been the 4th. I knew there was a military officer. I couldn't remember if Sessions had added Kellogg or not. Swalwell, did Sessions add anyone else? Senator Sessions. Dearborn, yes. Swalwell, who else did he add? Dearborn, Keith Payne, a nuclear expert. There were several generals that he was interested. He talked to a lot of people, asking them to join. Some did and some didn't. Some said that they couldn't. He talked to Jack Keane, Ph. He talked to several others. Some people at that point in time had conflicts because they were a foreign policy advisor for a different candidate, since there were 17 of them running. Mr. Swalwell, so prior to Dearborn, and there's a list. I'm sure one of the emails has a list of, names of people that were contacted. Swalwell, so prior to Lieutenant General Kellogg, for example, being put on the team, is he somebody that Senator Sessions knew of? Dearborn, Kellogg? Swalwell, yes. Dearborn, yeah, I think he knew Kellogg in his prior role. Swalwell, how about Joe Schmitz? Was he aware of who Joe Schmitz was? Dearborn, I think he knew Joe Schmitz. I think he knew who Joe Schmitz was. Swalwell, and Sam Clovis, did he know who Sam Clovis was? Dearborn, I don't think either of us knew Sam until Swalwell, the campaign. Dearborn, the campaign. Swalwell, how about Carter Page? Was Carter Page an individual prior to being put on that team, advisory team? Was he someone that Senator Sessions knew? Dearborn, no, we never heard of him. Swalwell, how about George Papadopoulos? Dearborn, never heard of him. Swalwell, so is it fair to say that the three individuals that you had never heard of were Sam Clovis, Carter Page, and George Papadopoulos? Dearborn, before the campaign. Swalwell, right. Dearborn, I think that's fair. Swalwell, did Senator Sessions contact any of the individuals once they were named on the foreign policy team? Dearborn, I don't think he and Page, I don't remember him and Page ever speaking. Mr. Swalwell, I mean, just sort of like a congratulatory call, welcome to the team. Mr. Dearborn, the ones that he would have placed on, yeah, but he would have kind of done that as he was recruiting them on. The ones that you've talked about, I would think that whatever interaction he had with them would have been very limited. Swalwell, did you contact Carter Page prior to or once he was announced to have been on the team? Dearborn, I mean, I don't think I contacted him to congratulate him, and Swalwell, how about to put him to work? Dearborn, no, I don't really remember having any correspondence with Carter Page. If there is some, it would have been, I don't even know what it would have been. Swalwell, how about George Papadopoulos? Did you reach out to him once he was put on the team? Dearborn, I didn't, not to congratulate him, but he kept inquiring of people on the campaign. He wanted to go on a lot of trips, and we didn't have the budget. So my responses to him were normally, we don't have a budget for that. But Sam normally talked to those guys because we saw them as his guys. He knew them. Swalwell, did you understand Sam Clovis, to be the person who put those individuals on the team? Dearborn, uh-huh. Swalwell, is that yes? I'm sorry, just for the reporter. Dearborn, yes. I'm sorry, yes. Swalwell, once the team was assembled, how often did you or Senator Sessions correspond with them? Dearborn, correspond? Swalwell, or I guess update them, set an agenda, get their feedback. Dearborn, there was an agenda, and there was a meeting that was conducted at the Trump Hotel. Swalwell, what prep work went into that Trump Hotel meeting that you were part of? Dearborn, it would have been a loose agenda. Probably introductions. I'm sure a go-around. Everyone introduced themselves. And then, as I understand it, it probably would have opened up for people to have conversations. Swalwell, were there any pre-Trump hotel meetings that occurred or like pre-dinners prior to that? Dearborn, there were some dinners and events that J.D. Gordon put together with different members of the working group, but I never attended those, and I don't know if it was the full group or different subsets, but that was kind of he kind of managed that. Swalwell, do you know whether Carter Page ever attended any of those pre-dinners? Dearborn, I don't. Swalwell, do you know whether George Papadopoulos ever attended any of those pre-dinners? Dearborn, I don't know if he did or not. Swalwell, Do you know where those dinners were held? Dearborn, restaurants, probably around town. Swalwell, did Senator Sessions ever attend any of those pre-dinners? Dearborn, I think Sessions went to a couple of events, but I'm not sure if he went to those specific dinners. But I know that he went to some events with J.D. Swalwell, do you know if any of those dinners that Senator Sessions went to include George Papadopoulos? Dearborn, I don't believe that they did, but, again, I wasn't at the dinners. Swalwell, do you know if any of those dinners that Senator Sessions went to included Carter Page? Dearborn, again, same thing, I wouldn't know. Swalwell, prior to the Trump Hotel meeting, was there any discussions about how Russia would factor into the campaign's foreign policy views? Dearborn, I'm sorry, can you say that again? Dearborn, prior to the Trump Hotel meeting with the team, was there any discussion about how Russia would factor into the candidate's views on foreign policy? Oh, that might have been Swalwell. See, Mr. Dearborn, which tells you there might be other mistakes in here. Mr. Dearborn, no. The best way to answer that is, other than just an around-the-world discussion of different hotspots, and Russia happens to be on the globe, so, we'd cover that too, but not like a Russia-specific conversation. Mr. Swalwell, what was your understanding of candidate Trump's views toward Russia prior to that first meeting? Mr. Dearborn, I think he was. The only thing I know is what I read, and the things that he was saying, which was he was hopeful he could, as a country, we could find ways to work with Russia. Swalwell, and how would you characterize Senator Sessions' views on Russia prior to that first meeting? Dearborn, I think Sessions was hopeful that would be possible as well, but he was pretty much a realist about Russia. Swalwell, would you say that candidate Trump and Senator Sessions, at least at that point in time, that their views were aligned on Russia? Dearborn, they were probably pretty close. I'm sure there were probably some differences, but we didn't go down. I never went down any kind of a checklist on that with him. Mr. Swalwell, sure. Now that meeting occurred on March 31st, 2016, and you said that was at the Trump Hotel. Is that right? Dearborn, yes, sir. Swalwell, did you attend the meeting? Dearborn, I did, and I didn't. Swalwell, okay. What do you mean by that? Dearborn, so I helped arrange it. J.D. kind of was responsible for that team. Mr. Swalwell, what did you do to help arrange it? Dearborn, J.D., can you call these guys and get them to this meeting? We need to have a National Security Working Group meeting. So he asked them all to join. I put together the list. A very simple and basic agenda like the one I just kind of walked through. Kind of a walk around. Everyone introduce themselves and talk about issues of interest. On the heels of that meeting in the same room, right after, it was a meeting with a lot of different kind of association and industry leaders here in town that have never met with the then candidate, just so they could have a chance to talk and meet. So I arranged it. I know I popped in the room to make sure that the meeting was going on, but I came out pretty quick because I was welcoming all of those folks in a kind of a separate room and kind of hung there and waited for them. And then as the first meeting broke up, kind of ushered them in and then spent. I think I was in for the entire second meeting. I was in and out for the first one, but mostly just to kind of check and see how things were going. Swalwell, was there an agenda for that meeting? Dearborn, for the second meeting. Swalwell, I'm sorry, for the first meeting. Was an agenda distributed to the members? Dearborn, I don't know that we had an agenda. If you see something in an email that says there was one, then that's fine. It would have been a one-sheeter that had maybe the names, but I think we just kind of went around. If I remember right, I don't remember us having like specified topics that were listed. Swalwell, I want to show you a photo of the meeting just to kind of set the table for you. Does that look like an accurate depiction of the March 31st meeting? Dearborn, it's definitely the one I've seen on TV. Swalwell, okay, and if it's okay with the chairman, I'll mark it as Exhibit 1. Dearborn, Exhibit 1 was marked for identification.